Diolch Owen, a mae'n bleser cael ymuno gyda'r sgwrs heddi, yn falch o gael cyfle i siarad yn uniongyrchol am ffordd i ni yn bwrw wrthi gyda'r sialens a'r cyfle o adnewyddu a diwygio addysg yma yng Nghymru. Ond dwi ddim am i'r sesiwn fod yn un lle dwi jyst yn siarad a chythau'n gwrando rwy'n awyddus iawn i glywed cwestiynau a'r sylwadau sydd gyda chi. Byddai'n falch iawn o ateb y cwestiynau sydd ganddoch chi ar y diwedd. Mae'r broses yma o ddaialog yn credu yn un tra phwysig. Mae wedi gweithio i'n helpu ni i gydweithio dros y flwyddyn diwetha wrth bod ni'n cefnogi ein dysgwyr, ac mae wedi bod yn help yn y blynyddoedd wrth bod ni'n paratoi tuag at cyd-awdurdo a chyflwyno y cwricwlwm newydd. Ers i fi ddechrau ar y swydd hon, rwy wedi treulio gymaint o amser â phosib yn gwrando ar staff a dysgwyr o ysgolion ac o golegau a lleoliadau eraill, ac rwy wedi fy hynna'n cael fy ysbrydoli gan y ffordd mae pawb wedi bod yn addasu i heriau'r pandemig. Ond rwy hefyd yn ymwybodol iawn o'r anawsterau i chi wedi bod yn ei wynebu ac yn dal i wynebu, a hefyd beth sydd angen i ni i wneud i'ch helpu chi a'ch staff a'n dysgwyr yn ei gyd. Dwi ddim yn tanystyru'r sialensau i chi'n wynebu, credwch fi. I want to say something a little bit initially around the transmission of the virus and the infection rates. At the moment, infection rates in the 10 to 19-year-old cohort appear to be levelling off. We've seen this in the latest Public Health Wales Education Weekly statistics. This actually does reflect Welsh Government modelling, but it's, I think, important that we remain cautious, and we will probably need to wait a couple of weeks before we can confirm a trend in the numbers across a number of weeks. So far, we are following the pattern that we have seen taking place in Scotland. Schools there obviously returned in mid-August, and following a peak there, the figures have been continuing to decline. But I don't underestimate how difficult and indeed how overwhelming the situation will feel in some schools. Some of the key concerns that you've identified with us in advance of this session, I'll try to address some of these in my comments now. You can see some of them highlighted on the screen there. I'm sure that they will all look very familiar to many of you. So I'm going to try and address some of those in my comments now, and there will be a further opportunity with Owen and the panelists later to explore more of those in greater detail. But we are on a transformation journey in our education system, and that obviously will always raise concerns and anxieties. And I appreciate as well that some schools will feel more confident perhaps than others about where they are on their journey. But what I would say is that September 2022 is not the point in time when everything starts to change. That process of change is already underway, it's already happening. We can look at the transformation that's already happened towards curriculum reform, and the steps which are being taken right across the education system to support well-being and progression throughout the period of the last 12 to 18 months of the pandemic. The additional learning needs system has come into force. Changes are being phased in, as you know, over time. It will take time to bed in. I absolutely recognise that. We will be publishing further guidance imminently to assist you in the implementation of those reforms. And I believe that time is important in the journey that we're on at the moment, which is why I made the decision to provide some flexibility in the rollout of the new curriculum, recognising obviously the challenges that the pandemic has overlaid on the work that schools were carrying out to prepare for the curriculum. But I think in the midst of the reform journey that we're on, I think it's important to remember and to remind ourselves really why we are undertaking the journey, why we're making the changes. The new curriculum, as we will all know, is about supporting and enabling better educational outcomes for all our learners. We want to provide all our children and young people with the best possible tools they can have to succeed in life. That really is our bottom line. Whether that's about funding, whether it's about support for learners transitioning from school, or funding to help schools to provide extra teaching capacity to support the particular needs of early years learners, whether it's about creating space to focus on your particular school's priorities or what your learners need, in the way that we've suspended full requirements of the current national curriculum, suspending performance measures, pausing categorisation, and Eston's suspension of their core inspection programme into the autumn term. And crucially as well, supporting learner mental health and well-being. We can't expect learners to study well and engage in everything that education has to offer if they're struggling to cope mentally, if they're struggling to cope emotionally. And what you've achieved, what schools have achieved so far, I think in the most challenging possible circumstances, I think should give us all confidence in the journey that lies ahead. I know you're already focused on the big things that support learners to achieve. On top of the innovation taking place in schools, we've been working to further improve the curriculum, ensuring that Black, Asian and minority ethnic experiences are integral to the new curriculum, clearly embedding Welsh language within the new curriculum, committing to deliver the pedagogy and support to enable all learners to develop bilingually along that single continuum. We've also continued to work on the new framework for evaluation, improvement and accountability, aligning that with the thrust of the broader reforms. And that's going to allow schools to have a more central role in driving their own improvement with that robust underpinning of self-evaluation. The focus that we have as a government and our partners have is on the kind of practical support that we can give to schools so that you feel safe and secured and secure and supported. We're working together to support you on that kind of approach of co-construction, really at all levels, developing a more responsive support system. Eston is refocusing its inspection programme, currently asking for your views on that. I'm sure Claire will be happy to respond in more detail during the Q&A on how they will be supporting schools on the next stage of the journey. Qualifications Wales, as you will have seen, has announced today their decision with regards to the future GCSEs to support the new curriculum. They'll be working with partners to further develop these, and Philip obviously is here to answer any questions that you may have in relation to that. Our new national network sets out our shared agenda. That's an opportunity for you to tell us and the regions and other partners what you need and where you need help as a group. And alongside this, the regional consortia and the partnerships will continue to facilitate the conversations between schools to build up that self-improving system that we all want to see. But we are here to help because we recognise the pressure that you have been under and that you continue to be under. And your staff right across the school workforce have played an extraordinary role over the last 18 months. We need to continue working together so that we can all progress along the journey that we're on and provide the support that you need in order to do that and to support your learners to achieve their potential as we all want to see. That, I think, is the promise, if you like, of the new curriculum. I'm absolutely confident we'll be able to achieve that and keen to support you in all that you're doing to make that a reality. Diolch yn fawr iawn, Owen.
Diolch yn fawr, Gweinidog. A fel wedys ti ar y dechrau, mae hwn yn gyfle yn amlwg i brif athrawon i glywed yn uniongyrchol gennych chi, ond hefyd iddyn nhw, mae hwn yn gyfle iddyn nhw gofyn cwestiynau, felly mae rai yn dechrau dod trwyddo yn ara bach. So yes, as I said, Minister, as you said at the start, this is not just an opportunity for you to to address head teachers, but also, for them to kind of provide feedback and to ask you questions. And I know you've got a little bit of time now to be able to do that. So I would encourage people to post. There are a few coming through. So I'll start with the first question, if that's okay, Minister. And that is, I suppose, a reflection in terms of, the current pressures that head teachers are facing, and obviously the disruption from the third wave currently throughout schools in Wales. So what do you feel in terms of how is the system going to deliver both curriculum reform, a new ALN system, and the other expectations during this academic year, given the pressures that people are currently feeling? What are your views on that? Hi, Minister, you've muted yourself.
Oh, forgive me. I'm not doing well with the technology today. My apologies. So I was saying that, as I said in my opening comments, I'm conscious that there is a range of experiences across the school system about the feeling of being ready for the new curriculum. I think it's really important that we look at September 2022 not as, the beginning, if you like. There's a process of preparation which has been going on for a long time. That is the rolling out of the next stage, but that itself is the beginning of a new stage of the journey, if you like. And we will be on an iterative journey from September 22 onwards. But I don't underestimate the challenges of managing the pressures of COVID and the reforms to ALN alongside moving forward into the launch and the rollout of the new curriculum. I'm hopeful that the publication which we made available in the last few weeks, which seeks to bring together, if you like, some of the requirements and interventions around COVID and the curriculum, conveys the sense that we aren't looking to pull in opposite directions. We're trying to make sure that these experiences are aligned. I've said previously in earlier discussions that I think that the kind of creativity and the focus on learner well-being and the kind of innovation and flexibility that we've seen over the last year or more are a very firm foundation, really, for a successful curriculum. That's what the curriculum itself, the new curriculum itself, requires. So I think sort of bridging between one and the other, I think, is the objective. I'm not suggesting it is without its challenges. On the ALN front, obviously this is a very significant set of reforms. I'm very clear that they are the right reforms for our learners. Obviously, as many will know, we have staggered the introduction of the reforms, mindful of the fact that the impact of COVID has been significant, and so I hope that staggering the rollout of ALN reforms will be helpful to schools and to learners as well. Obviously, the next stage now starts in January of next year. I'm conscious that there is an appetite for more guidance in relation to how those reforms will be managed and run, and we're expecting to publish some further guidance imminently, which I hope will be helpful. But very keen to hear, and I'm sure we'll have this discussion later, the experiences of schools themselves in managing those three priorities.
Okay, diolch yn fawr. So the next question I have is one from Chris Britton. So could you articulate your understanding of the impact that COVID is having on leadership teams and teachers in Wales at this time?
Yes, I can. Chris, thank you for that question. I think that for many schools it's a very, very challenging situation at the moment, isn't it? And I think, in many ways, probably one could argue, I'm sure many would, that it's perhaps the most challenging part, in a sense, apart from maybe the very, very early period of COVID, because transmission rates are very high in the community. Obviously, the vaccination has made a very significant difference to the relationship between infection and serious illness, as we know, but we all have the shared ambition to make sure that our learners can be in school, having lost the time that they have over the last year or 18 months. So that's a very challenging set of circumstances for heads and teachers to be managing, and I don't underestimate for a second what that must mean in terms of the pressures, in particular on school leaders, in managing staff absence, managing pupil absence. I think there are a range of challenges which come in that area. I'm aware that there's a significant pressure on getting supply cover for staff absence. From a kind of funding point of view, obviously we've sought to support that by continuing the access to the hardship fund so that supply costs can be covered. But I also know from talking to heads that actually it isn't so much the funding, it's the question of getting supply teachers into schools. I know that in my own local area, I'm talking to heads elsewhere. There are some things which we are looking at to see what we can do as a government to help with that. One of the issues we've heard is around DBS checks taking too long. So we've written to the DBS to see what we can do to encourage them to speed that up, so that we can hopefully support more supply teachers available. I think there's also a set of challenges around managing remote learning for those learners who aren't in school, but also delivering tuition in the classroom as well. So I recognise there's a range of tensions which heads are facing. My task, I think, is to try and reconcile the various challenges that we can contribute to supporting. Really, I want to make sure that we have guidance which is very clear as possible. I know there have been some questions around some of the aspects of guidance. I hope we've been able to clarify that for school leaders. We've also made some funding available in terms of CO2 monitors, and you'll have seen today an announcement around ventilation, so some kind of practical steps to help support schools in that way. But obviously this is part of an ongoing dialogue, and we're in constant discussion with our colleagues in local education authorities and teaching unions, but also keen to hear from you what more you think we can do.
Okay, diolch. And you just covered one of the questions which has just popped up, Minister, was around that additional support, the announcement today. So thank you for that. So question here around cases in schools, and obviously you will know that they've been very high since the start of term. So two parts to this question. Are they what we expected as a Welsh Government, firstly? And then the second one is around, are there any plans to introduce more measures at the national level?
Well, the modelling for the rates of transmission for the virus generally, since the start of the pandemic, actually, has been provided for us by Swansea University. They've provided a model which enables us to, well, it's not a prediction, it's a sort of range of possibilities, if you like. But it has been pretty helpful throughout in terms of a guide to the future pattern of the pandemic. And so we've been able to draw on that data and advice on the one hand, but we've also been able to look at what has been happening in Scotland, where the term obviously starts a few weeks before the term does in Wales. And the pattern of what appears to be happening now and what has been happening over the last few weeks, is broadly consistent with what those two experiences tell us. So in that sense, what we've seen is within the range of things which we felt, how we felt it would perhaps develop over the last few weeks. But I want to be clear that, as I said at the start of what I was saying earlier, there is an understandable desire, I think, on the part of all of us, certainly on my part, and I know this is widely shared, to look at the data week by week and grasp hold of any positive, numbers. But I do think it's important for us to let that settle. Perhaps, we've got another week ahead of us before the half term, and that will, I think, give us more information about where the trajectory is of the numbers. The question about the national picture, if you like, a national any further steps. The way that the system works, as colleagues will know, is that the underlying risk analysis, if you like, is done on a kind of cross-sectoral basis, and there's a Wales-wide analysis, and that is what informs the alert levels, and we're obviously at alert level 0 at the moment. What we've published in the last few weeks is the updated coronavirus control plan, which some of you may have seen. It's on the website if you haven't and you wish to, and it describes the most likely scenarios over the coming weeks and what that would mean in terms of Wales-wide response, if you like. And to the best of our ability to, to look forward, we think that we are likely to be able to progress through the winter and autumn months with the same basket, if you like, of restrictions that we currently have. You'll have heard the First Minister talking elsewhere about his hope and expectation that we have, we're heading towards a Christmas which will feel more normal, certainly, than last year's did. But we are also very, very conscious and clear of the fact that that could be those plans, if you like, could be upset by the development or introduction of a new variant which might be resistant to the vaccine and so on. So, there may be unpredictable aspects which we would need to clearly respond to. And I think the other dimension is the pressure, obviously, on the health system in particular, which is, as you will all know, very acute. So these things are kept under review. Clearly, if we felt that there was a need to introduce new restrictions, then obviously we would have to do that. But the current modelling suggests that the most likely pattern over the coming weeks is more or less the level of restriction that we currently have. Just finally, that's the national picture. All colleagues will know about the frameworks which apply at a national level but respond to local circumstances. I think 8 out of 22 of our local authorities are currently operating a mix of mitigations in schools which are not at the lower level, if you like, and I think I'm right in saying they're all operating at the high level or a mix of the high level interventions. I don't for a second suggest the frameworks are, have always been straightforward to apply from the get-go. These things, I think, necessarily take some time to become familiar tools, but I think, that to me suggests that they are capable of flexing to respond to local circumstances. And obviously some schools have introduced configurations within the classroom, one-way systems, the wearing of face masks outside the classroom and so on to reflect their local circumstances. So the challenge we have is what's the kind of Wales-wide framework and how can that be made to reflect local circumstances?
Okay, diolch yn fawr. I've got a few questions here actually in terms of examinations, which no doubt we can pick up later with Philip. But somebody just wants to know your view, Minister, in terms of, is it really fair and considerate in terms of pupil and staff well-being to go ahead with exams next summer?
The commitment that we made this year and that I made as Education Minister was to make sure that our learners this year were not disadvantaged, and that remains my commitment in relation to next year's cohort. I think that I hope and expect that the experience of the school year this year, notwithstanding what we've been talking about this first half term, will be obviously very different to the experience of last year. In the longer term, I want us to be able to draw on the experience of this summer and last summer in terms of the role of teacher assessment in informing qualifications for our learners. But I do think that requires, planning and reflection. It isn't, no one wants to design assessment qualifications, over a short horizon. These things obviously take some time to develop and roll out. So I do think that it's the right approach to move back to examinations next summer. But, if circumstances are not as we hope they will be, then Qualifications Wales has also obviously announced a contingency plan for that, which seeks to align with assessments which teachers will be undertaking with their learners in any event over the coming months. We'll keep these things under review. We've also, I think, provided additional resource to enable schools to support learners in exam years with additional tuition and support, as well as resources for exam preparation and so on. And that is designed specifically to give more support to those learners facing exams next year, to give them the best possible opportunity. we've also, I think, where remote learning is needed, as it has been in many schools over the last few weeks, I hope you would agree that is a much better offer than perhaps it was necessarily at the start of the pandemic. And whilst obviously we want to see children in classrooms learning, I do think that has provided a better resource base for when pupils have to be at home. So I hope that mix of interventions gives next year's cohort the best possible opportunity.
Okay, and just conscious of your time, Minister, have you got time for one last quick question?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so I've got one here around the curriculum. So this questioner asks, why have you not delayed the start of curriculum reform for primary schools in the same way that you have for secondaries?
Okay, so the work that we did to assess readiness in schools, working with consortia, talking directly to practitioners, and the surveys that we undertook of schools' perception of their own readiness showed a very clear picture, I think. There was a much higher level of perceived readiness among school leaders in the primary sector than, and the picture was more mixed, if I can put it like that, in the secondary sector. And I think in a way that was not hugely surprising, because I think the journey that primary schools have been on has taken them along that road faster than it has for secondary schools, for reasons that we would all understand. So if you start from the point of saying that we think the curriculum is the right thing for our learners in Wales, as obviously we do, then there needs to be a special justification, if you like, for moving away from that. Now, clearly COVID has clearly had a significant impact, we've just been talking about it. But despite that, the level of readiness that primary schools felt they had was, I think, certainly at the level which would not have justified, asking the whole system to delay that for a further year. I do think the picture is slightly different in secondary schools. I'm very hopeful that secondary schools that feel ready to introduce the curriculum for year 7 from next September will do that, but they have the opportunity, obviously, of delaying that by a year so that it's rolled out for years 7 and 8 together the following year. It felt to me that struck the right balance in making steps towards, towards the destination that we all are heading towards, maintaining the overall timetable, but providing that additional level of flexibility for the part of the system that most needed it.
Okay, diolch yn fawr, Gweinidog. Dwi'n gwybod bod amser yn bryn, felly diolch yn fawr I chi am ymuno ni prynawn. Thank you very much, Minister, for joining us this afternoon.
Croeso, diolch yn fawr iawn.
Okay, diolch yn fawr.